Thank you everyone for being here. My name is Sandra. I am with RLR. And everyone, I believe, remembers Sheila from our last two webinars that she's been doing great. And so I will let Sheila get started.
Thank you, Sandra. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for all of you who are coming back. Thank you so much for joining us again. And for those of you who are new, my name is Sheila Shaffi. I'm a co-founder of a company by the name of ProcessArc. We've been around for 20 years, and we essentially help financial institutions automate their business processes. And today I wanted to use the next 25 minutes to talk about a technology and a domain that's expanding quite rapidly, which is generative AI. It holds a lot of promise in terms of what it can do in terms of efficiency and client experience in the world of banking and credit unions. But of course, with everything good in life, there's also downsides. And so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about how wonderful generative AI is. We can perhaps leave that topic for another day. But as financial institutions, one of our permanent roles is to safeguard against risk and essentially protect our customers and shareholders equally. So the focus of today's presentation is around understanding the risks associated with using generative AI applications and discussing how best to mitigate against them. And at the end of this webinar, you will receive an email, a thank you email for taking the time to attend with the recording attached. And we will also provide you with a survey. It's a very short survey, 7 questions to help you assess and get yourself a risk score associated with the usage of the generative AI applications. So with that, let's get started. And I'll leave a few minutes at the end so that we can have a little bit of Q&A. All right. So again, we are really ultimately here to talk about generative AI risks, in particular to our space of banking. And so again, very quickly, we are customer experience architects, and our job is to help financial institutions design and automate their business processes. And we are practically 100% at this point in time a Microsoft Power Platform shop. And we've been around for 20 years. So we have a clear understanding of the risks and challenges that exist within the world of banking. And so just to make you feel a little bit comfortable, again, because you may not have seen us before, we have a plethora of smaller, but also very large Fortune 100, Fortune 500 financial institutions that trust us in helping them leverage technology to overcome business challenges. So again, why are we here? At the end of the day, whether or not you decide to actually deploy artificial intelligence in your bank, you are equally exposed to generative AI risks. So this is not something that you can say, well, I'm not going to use it. My bank is not dependent on AI, so I don't really care, or I shouldn't be worried about. The reality is that just because Gen AI exists, your bank is at risk. And the reality is that the minute any kind of data within your FI leaves the banks, the 4 walls of bank, and the security platforms that you have, that data is equally available to everybody that's out there. So again, I just want to talk about what the risks are and what your toolkit is to mitigate against those risks. Now, some very high-level statistics around what's happening in the industry. So generative AI is not going to go away anytime soon. It's about a $90 billion business now, industry now, and it's going to essentially quadruple in the next 5 years. And based on the International Data Corporation analysis, financial institutions are kind of leading the charge in terms of using AI to either streamline their underwriting practices, prevent fraud, or streamline their business processes to provide better customer experience. Now, the next point is kind of interesting because a lot of companies are saying, yes, we're going to use Chat GPT or generative AI, Chat GPT is just a platform or an application around generative AI to improve my business. But the problem is over half of them don't have the skill set, or they're not exactly sure how to use it because it's kind of new. And the predominant way that financial institutions are using generative AI applications is through chatbots. I'm just going to leave the stats at this point in time because, again, I just want to spend the rest of the time focusing on what's happening. So generative AI comes in a plethora of applications. As a matter of fact, last year alone, there were over 14,000 new AI companies that popped up in the United States alone. So this is not a trend that's going to go anywhere. The Chat GPT just happens to be the name that everyone knows about. It's become a household name, and Chat GPT is indeed a generative AI application. And if you've played with Chat GPT, essentially it's a artificial intelligence chatbot where you give it a prompt or you provide it with a question, and in return, it gives you an answer. DALL-E 2 is another OpenAI platform where by simply describing a scene, it can actually create an image for you. Lensa is another example where you can take a selfie and based on the descriptions you provided, can modify your image. And Copy.ai is one that provides copyrights. It can create blogs for you. It can help define a tone of a particular message. So the domain of generative AI is changing quite rapidly, and there's applications being developed practically on a daily basis. Now, generative AI may be new to our world, but generative AI really is just a subset of artificial intelligence that's been around since the 1950s. And AI is really just trying to use the data that we have within our organization in order to be able to mimic human intelligence. And machine learning kind of took AI to the next level by saying, I'm going to use data now to predict and make decisions and be able to essentially determine if there's fraud activities going on or who may be prepaying a loan early or who may be going into default. So it was about predicting what may be coming next. Deep learning took a level lower and essentially mimic the neural networks of the human brain. And by that, I mean it tried to connect all sorts of disparate data points within the four walls of an institution or outside the four walls of an institution to be able to make much more complex decisions. And generative AI is essentially AI on steroids, but with one key difference, which is really where the risk begins to come in. Now, let me explain what I'm talking about here. So AI, we just talked about. It's about using the data that you have to make predictions. It's about mimicking human intelligence. Generative AI is really the relationship between human and machine communication. And by that, I mean, generative AI is using the data that's out there to create content, images, computer codes, music, anything, any content that you can imagine that doesn't exist yet. So that's really fundamentally the key difference between AI and generative AI, which is really, again, where the risk is going to come in. Because it's using what historically has been to create what hasn't been created yet. And the key success factor in being able to use generative AI tools properly, particularly the chatbots, is around the prompts or the questions that you give it. So prompt engineering is a key factor in successfully using generative AI. So I just want you to keep that in mind as we talk about this, because it's easier to control artificial intelligence because it's using the data that you have to make predictions about your business and your customers' behavior. Generative AI is creating something that doesn't exist yet. So these are the three key areas that we have seen seen financial institutions use AI/generative AI in their financial institutions, which again, it's an incredibly powerful tool. There is a lot of upside that will come out of generative AI applications. We just have to know how to control the beast, essentially. Otherwise, the beast is going to control us. And that's the gist of this presentation. So the three key areas around banking use cases has to do around knowledge management, being able to make credit decisions faster, and ultimately cybersecurity. So if you can, I'm just going to talk about one of them in particular, which is knowledge management. So you can imagine in most financial institutions, and we've been in banking for over 20 years now, the one thing that seems to stand true in all banks is that we are set up as silos. You've got the marketing department and then the compliance department, operations, and in very few instances do we really cross-pollinate and work like a matrix organization. So the data is siloed, and it becomes very difficult to actually get information that you need quite rapidly, whether that's training material, policy, legal and compliance documents, contracts that we may have signed, engineering documents from a systems perspective. And generative AI, by using the prompt engineering that we talked about, by just saying, can you give me customer X's information on this product, can go into everywhere where we have data and extract the relevant data that you need and provide it to you. So clearly, it is a much faster way of pinpointing exactly where the data is, collating it, condensing it, and giving it back to you in the format that you've asked for it. The same notion applies to credit decisioning and cybersecurity. It's using data to be able to make decisions faster. And that's really ultimately the case around generative AI. Now, if you take nothing away from today's presentation, but just this one slide, I would consider it a total win, which is that we really have 3 layers of risk when it comes to using the various platforms. You have what we call outbound risk, which is essentially us inadvertently, employees, board members, leadership members, essentially pushing out information to the World Wide Web without intending to do so. So essentially exposing sensitive and confidential information out to the world. Inbound risk is risk that you are going to get exposed to as an FI because of either deep fakes or hallucinations. So essentially being exposed to risk based on information that's faulty and does not exist. And I'll give you a couple of examples. An application, we put it as last because in order for you to be exposed to application risk, you have to have made a conscious decision in your bank to actually begin to use the AI and generative AI tools to actually do something with it. And when you start using AI and Gen AI tools, then you have to start thinking about data security concerns, accuracy, compliance, biases, ethical concerns that essentially envelope the AI tools and the machine learning that comes with AI. So I want to focus most of our conversation around outbound risk because that's the point where you actually have control and you can do something about it immediately. Here's prime examples of outbound risk. And I specifically used 2 very high-tech, high-profile institutions like Samsung and Microsoft to illustrate the fact that exposure to outbound risk is not limited to the medium to small size institution. We, by the sheer fact that our employees can go online, we are exposed to outbound risk. And in the case of Samsung, there were 2 instances just recently. One being that an employee inadvertently used Chat GPT to help him optimize the testing sequence of a new product that they were testing. So essentially exposing confidential product development secrets out into the marketplace. And then another employee used Chat GPT to help them convert notes that was taking place in a board meeting and turn it into a presentation. So again, incredibly sensitive information being leaked out into the world for everyone to see. In the case of Microsoft, I mean, come on, guys, Microsoft, these guys are in the space of defining automation and providing security. Inadvertently, AI researchers, let alone just not any researchers, but people in the space of AI, accidentally leaked terabytes of sensitive data.
Calls and says default's off $100. So I'm looking in at $300. So I'm looking into it. You can't tell me anything besides default is on. Well, my cash clearings is on.
We have generative AI risk. I mean, it couldn't have been a sweeter moment or an example. In this situation, it was a phone call that we all got to hear. But it doesn't take much to extrapolate. It's the same concept. You could inadvertently go on to Chat GPT, and if you don't know how to use these platforms correctly, if your employees don't understand how to use these platforms correctly, we are essentially dealing with risk continuously. And in the case of inbound risk, right, we're talking about two very specific risks that we have to be aware of. One is deep fake, and the other one is hallucination. Here's an example. I provided a picture of a deep fake, and this is an instance where essentially somebody could come into a bank with an image, like a driver's license or an artifact that may seem totally real and valid, but it's essentially fabricated, and you cannot make the distinction between reality and a fake. And this image was created within a few seconds, where someone took a selfie of themselves and were able to make themselves look like Tom Cruise. So the caliber and the quality of deep fakes is increasing and improving rapidly. In the case of hallucinations, this is a case where we ask ChatGPT a question and ChatGPT provides a reply. But the problem is we have no idea the source of the data that ChatGPT has used to actually provide that response to us. So if the sources of the data that ChatGPT used are flawed, inaccurate, fabricated, we have no way of knowing that. So essentially, we are in a way blindly putting our trust into the responses that we get from ChatGPT in order to make potentially a decision. And there was a lawyer last year whose case got thrown out, and actually he got disbarred for this very reason, where he tried to essentially build his entire defense strategy and claim based on responses he was getting out of ChatGPT. So the risks are real. There's cybersecurity fraud and also data leakage that are elements within your realm that we need to understand how to control. And to summarize this, I'm just going to shift the conversation now to a decision tree to help you guys figure out where you sit in this. Is that it doesn't matter, again, whether or not you actively or consciously decide to use generative AI like ChatGPT in your organization. The reality is, just by the sheer existence of these generative AI apps, we are exposed to risk. So the risk is not at all contingent on our participation, a conscious participation to use these applications. So I just want you guys to think about this decision tree. And of course, you'll have access to this presentation, so you can go back to it and think through it and bring your team together. Really, the way to diagnose whether or not you're exposed or not is to start thinking about whether or not your employees at the bank can actually use generative AI applications. So another way to say it is, can your employees and your leaders access any application they want online? And if the answer is yes, which I'm assuming most of you haven't locked down any of the generative AI applications, if you're like, yeah, my people can access whatever websites or applications they want while they're working, then the second question you need to be considering is, do I have any usage policies, system security, or training in place, particularly employee and management training in place that would have helped them understand what generative AI tools can do, how to use them, when to use them, and what kind of risks they're exposed to. And if your answer is no, that we don't really have a policy in place, then you have to start really immediately thinking about the three options that you have. And the three options, regardless of what option you pick, the one thing stands true is that training your employees is really not a nice to have option anymore. Everybody that works in a financial institution needs to understand what these generative AI tools are so that they can recognize them from a risk perspective. So training stands true regardless of the option you pick. But then beyond that, you have three choices. You can either disable all generative AI applications within your bank effective immediately, or you can say, look, I see some value in these tools, so I'm going to provide training, but I'm going to essentially do an access management and control around who can access it. And in the back end, audit how they're using generative AI applications to make sure that they're not inadvertently exposing sensitive data. And the last option is to provide what we call a private instance. Essentially, you replicate the data that's out that generative AI or Chat GPT is using, and you create a private instance within the four walls, your security firewalls, and then you use that instance to be able to use Chat GPT essentially within your organization. So I know we may not all be thinking about this. It is completely a new platform out there. People think of it as a fun tool, as a way to, everyone thinks of it as a tool for their kids to be cheating on their essays or their homework. That's very well a true and valid concern. But from a running of an organization perspective, it also provides an opportunity for people to, again, inadvertently do something that puts the entire financial institution at risk. Now, if you've got all of these things in place, that's fantastic. Kudos to you. I think you guys are definitely ahead of the curve, in which case all you have to start thinking about is whether or not from a pricing perspective, you want to do a public usage of the generative AI applications, or again, excuse me, you want to create a private instance. So you will have access to this decision tree and the actions you need to be taking. And I'll wrap this up, given that this was supposed to be a 30-minute conversation, is that really, even if you decide to do nothing and you want to keep the generative AI applications open to your organization, at a minimum, like I stated earlier, everybody within the bank needs to have some sort of an awareness training around what these tools are and how they should be used within the four walls of your bank. And there should be some sort of a sign off that happens at the end of it as a way to protect yourself. So that's one thing. And then on the other side, it would be great if you start to think about a generative AI policy within the bank, because the training that you're providing should mimic a policy that should exist within the bank. And between those two things, essentially, I would feel a lot more comfortable that you're covered. Your people know what it is and how they should be using it. Then you can start thinking about, do I control usage? How do I monitor usage? And so on and so forth. So I don't at all want to dissuade banks from using these tools because they are incredibly powerful, can bring a lot of it, but controlling them. And so, like I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, once you get your thank you email, which again, I'm utterly grateful that you came. I know we're all super busy, but when you get that email and the recording of this webinar, you're also going to get an assessment questionnaire. Take your time, sit down with your CIO, Chief Technology Officer, Chief Information Officer, Chief Operating Officer, and just answer those 7 questions so you get a score and you get a sense of where you are in terms of risk and what the recommended action plans are that the survey will provide to you. With that, I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions. Okay. Well, it was all crystal clear. I'm excited. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Between RLR and us, we can certainly help implement If you think training is the right path, we can certainly help develop the training and implement it. If there's control mechanisms or system security that you're thinking about, we can certainly provide that as well. So it's really up to your organization to come up with a strategy to figure out how to mitigate against generative AI risks.
I'm
Sandra,
surprised that there are not some questions. I know my brain is like a hamster wheel right now. And and I'm looking forward to hearing from some of the banks where they may be on their AI journey. Does anyone want to volunteer?
Actually, someone just said there's a question in the Q&A, but mine is turning.
Yes, Sheila, I can read it. It's from Justin Worrell. Sorry if I said that wrong. It says, have you or RLR evaluated Microsoft 365 Copilot, specifically the usage of Copilot and Microsoft applications like Excel or Outlook?
Absolutely. Absolutely, we have. And actually, Microsoft Copilot is solutions that we help banks leverage and engineer as a way to audit. So there's not next month, but the month after, we are hoping to provide a webinar around the Copilot platform and how it can be used and what benefits it holds. So yes, absolutely. Great question. You know, the Microsoft Power Automate platform is unbelievably powerful. And I think that it holds a tremendous amount of opportunity for banks. It's just not, it's a lot. Let's just put it that way. It's a lot and it requires some expertise. So our hope and goal is to create a series of webinars that talk about the Microsoft Power Platform, just to help banks, figure out how to use it, where to use it. But it is absolutely a huge toolkit from a risk mitigation and an automation perspective. Thank you, Justin, for raising your hand. So if the rest of you, so some people have responded, use cases, and there's concern from the risk side. So this information, yes, there's certainly risk, but look, we've been in this business for 20 years. We've been using automation tools for 10. There's certainly risk, but that should not be the reason we stop using it. I think we're going to get to a point in the banking sector that not using it is not really an option, because our legacy systems, particularly Fiserv, sorry if I'm saying bad things, but the legacy systems are antiquated and they respond as quickly. So thank you for smiling and supporting that comment. But they are old and there's not a lot of investment going into them. So the only way to overcome operational challenges is through automation. So we can't shy away, but what we can do is understand the risks and put in policies, practices, protocols in place to mitigate against them. So again, this is, if we're going to stay competitive in the banking sector, particularly because we are commoditized. We're all offering the same things, checking accounts, loans, whatever. There's nothing left to differentiate us other than our service level to the customer. So, and to do that, we have to be faster, we have to be more responsive, we have to be intuitive, and that's where we need automation, generative AI tools. So yes, there's risks, but I don't think we can walk away from them. And Mike, thank you for mentioning the Microsoft and core system automation. We'll talk to RLR and see how we can share insights around that, use cases around, like, for example, we just implemented a very simple automation tool so that we could help and empower the bankers in the branches to quickly change products in the branch. So instead of sending a service request that would go back to the operations team that then would pull up the customer and figure out, oh, they're going to go from checking A type to checking B. Now, by simply providing 3 data points to us, a robot takes that and completely automates everything, and the back office can just check off on it and make sure everything was done. So there's a lot of automation opportunity. It doesn't have to be super sophisticated. It just has to have enough volume and enough customer impact for automation to make sense. So there's lots of case studies. We'll share them in whatever way that makes sense. But thank you for bringing that up. Okay, I don't want to take up any more of your time since I promised it was going to be these short, concise 30-minute presentations. So I'm going to hold myself to that. Please feel free to contact us, ask questions. Honestly, it's our pleasure to provide insight. I feel like if you guys are successful, we end up being successful. So we're here to help. Thank you for coming. Next month, it's going to be around the Microsoft Power Automate and Power Platform suite. So we can start diving into the different automation capabilities that are out there. So we can start, peeling back the layers of onion and giving you as much insight as we can to help you. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Sheila. We appreciate all your information.
Of course. Until next time.